Welcome r/Nuclearrevenge. Thieving rumored gets what's coming to him. So, many years ago, while still a teen, I moved out of my parents' place to live across the street from my junior college. There were many students in the building, so I rented a room in a large basement 3-bedroom unit that was reserved for students at the school. I didn't really know anyone in the building as it was on the other side of the city from where I grew up. At the time there was one other roommate already living in the unit who we'll call Scene. To be kind, Scene was a short fat putz, older than myself by a few years. He was in some kind of simplified remedial program as he'd failed a couple of school years, and mentioned how this was his last chance to make something of himself in his parents' eyes. Kinda dim, not too much going on in his life, but harmless, or so I thought. Anyways, I was hoping to start things off on the right foot with him as he was to be my roommate, so I wanted to be friends. As I was moving in my stuff, he mentioned how he had no money for a moving van. So I offered to do a trip with my rented van to his parents if he needed any help moving some stuff of his. He happily accepted. So we drive to his parents, where I meet his mother and discover that he's from a somewhat affluent family. Somewhat surprising considering he's too broke to hire a van, but whatever. Couple days later I meet his nice girlfriend who lived up the hill from our apartment. Translation: she was extremely affluent. This girlfriend would dote on him, visiting him a lot at our place, to the point where she would regularly hand deliver him delicious meals that had been prepared at her house. This will be important later. Anyways, it slowly becomes apparent that this unassuming guy has a dishonest streak. While moving my stuff in, I'd mentioned that I had a spare waterbed. He immediately offered to buy it, so I moved it in myself and set it up with the agreement he'd pay me a "friend price", around $200 for a $700 bed. Weeks pass, and he keeps giving me excuses about not paying whenever the subject comes up. He then started to randomly shift the narrative to a story about how his wealthy parents can pay for us to get a great condo in a new development just up the street. I remember wondering why his parents would make such an offer despite the fact we've just moved into our current apt. The story didn't make sense. Nevertheless, he constantly tried to set up some visit with me and get me involved. I wasn't really interested in moving again at that point, so I never really pursued it. I learned later that this was not only a lie, but a typical ploy of his. Anyways, as I had just moved out of my old neighborhood, I hadn't opened up a new bank account. This was before internet banking in this new part of town. So I was keeping my money, couple hundred, hidden in my room until I set up an account nearby. I was only loosely keeping track of this money and barely noticed how my money was going a little quickly until one day I go to get my last $40 and it's gone. Unfortunately, by this point a third roommate had moved into our flat, a cool hippie dude from Maritimes. So although I was convinced it was Scene that had robbed me, I wasn't 100% sure. To resolve things as amicably as possible, I decided to give him a chance to come clean. So one night I asked him point blank, fairly casually, if he'd taken my money as I'd noticed a small amount was missing. I'll never forget his reaction. He immediately stiffened, his eyes glazed over, and he blurted out I didn't take anything. It wasn't me, and just stared at me. I was shocked. He didn't just look guilty, his reaction had such a rehearsed quality. I could tell he'd been accused of similar things many times before. I tried my best to be calm, smile and act as if I believed him, but inside I was livid. I couldn't stop thinking about how this guy was trying to play me like a fool. I realized that, although I knew it was him, I couldn't do anything about it as I had no proof. By this point I felt sick to be living in the same space as this guy. I realized to get out of this situation and to deal with this jerk appropriately, I would have to lay a trap. To make sure he didn't suspect anything, the next day I was all smiles. Playing dumb, I exclaimed loudly how I hope I don't lose my money again. I just got paid and leave the apartment. Before I left, I made sure to leave my video camera filming my room. This was so long ago, it was a huge ass VHS tape camera that I had to hide on my bed under pillows and shit, but it still worked like a charm. I came back, replayed the tape, and 16 minutes in I see that motherfucker going through my shit. I tell you, I went cold as ice seeing Scene casually rifle through my things. My suspicions confirmed. I had to cool off with my friends across town over some beers. When I finally told them all what was happening, they started pulling out bats, hockey sticks and suggesting we go pay Scene a visit. As tempting as this was, I was now in college and didn't want to resort to messy violence. So instead I plotted my revenge. The first thing I did was to make sure my cool hippie third roommate was in the loop. Not having had a lot of time to get to know him, I asked him his thoughts on retribution and if he agreed with an eye for an eye. Confident we were on the same page, I showed him the video. He freaks out over having a thief for a roommate, but I reassure him to just be cool, cause some things are going to happen to Scene real soon. Then I went to stay at my parents' house and waited until that Thursday. You see, Scene liked to talk a lot. Turns out his rich parents had actually kicked him out of the house. The fact he'd actually found an apartment and gone back to school was a big success for him. On Thursday he'd be out of the apartment as his parents were having a big congratulatory dinner for him at their place. So I waited until I knew the dinner was underway, then called his house to speak to his mother. Crazy thing is, both he and his sister pick up the phone at the same time. So while his sister goes to get his mum on the line, he's asking me loudly, "Why are you calling my mother?" repeatedly. His mother gets on, and while Scene's screaming at his mother to hang up, I calmly state, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have reason to believe your son has stolen from me." Suddenly, there's dead silence. After almost a minute, she replies, "Take it up with Scene," and just hangs up. WTF. I don't know what reaction I expected, but it wasn't that. Anyways, now with just Scene on the line, I tell him the jig is up. I have him on tape and I want my money back. His replies, "You have nothing on me, fuck you." At this point I realize he's right. I'd really only filmed him rifling through my stuff. If I went to the police, the charges wouldn't stick, and there was a good chance he knew it. So by this point I tried very hard to be reasonable about things. But as it was, his rich parents couldn't care less. I had no real proof to go to the police with, and worst of all, I still had a year-long lease to live with him. So fuck that shit. I told him he'd better find another place to live, and hung up the phone as it was time to go nuclear on his ass. Remember how I said the putz talk too much? Turns out he'd bragged about how he'd faked his credentials for the app, and landlord had never checked. So first step was to drive with my folks to the landlord's office and tell them to evict him for theft immediately. When they start telling me crap, like we'll have to take some time to review this matter, I immediately threaten a lawsuit over how they're liable as I can prove they never did the prescribed background check. My landlord goes pale and instantly promises everything I ask. I then take this moment to go downstairs for a minute, a statement witnessed by multiple people. I then go to Scene's room and take thousands of dollars of his expensive shit, stereo, TV, hockey jerseys, cologne, etc., and put it all outside on our enclosed/hidden fire escape. I then go straight back upstairs, hello alibi, and leave with my folks. First chance I get, I call my friends with the bats. "Hey guys, who wants a new wardrobe and entertainment system?" I give them the instructions on how to find all of Scene's stuff hidden in the unused back alley and chill with parents for the next 3 to 4 days. Upon my return to Apt, I'm greeted with awe by a highly entertained hippie roommate who gave me the play-by-play of what went down in my absence. Apparently, Scene returned from his dinner to an empty room devoid of any of his possessions, causing him to rampage through the Apt and curse my name. When Hippie innocently asked what's wrong Scene, he tells him that I stole all his stuff, but that his dad would get it back for him, as if, lol. The next morning his alarm clock was the landlord walking into his room and showing it to a potential tenant while informing him that he was evicted immediately. He would later be dumped by his rich girlfriend who was buying his groceries. You haven't changed Scene. Again with the lying and cheating, and disowned very publicly by his well-to-do dad. Indeed, his dad had come to the apartment only to tell Scene he was worthless and that, despite his crying and begging, he could not live back at the house. Desperate, Scene followed his dad outside and jumped on the hood of the car, pleading to go home. The dad had to drive to a nearby police station to have him removed. Last thing I heard he was broke, dropped out of school, dumped by GF, and camping in a friend's backyard in a tent in Canada in November. TL. Dr. Rumor 2 I was nice to betrays my trust by lying and stealing from me, so I basically destroyed his life for at most $120 CAD. Edit. Addendum to show that I made the call that ruined Scene's homecoming dinner from my parents' place across town and not my shared apartment.